All right. I am really excited about this topic, design thinking and ethical considerations for AI technologies, because I've been learning about AI and using AI so much. It's really exciting too, because it's like, I feel like we're in the wild, wild west, like if for those of you that remember the 90s when the web was like really getting started and everything was brand new and we were all figuring this all out and creating all the rules around it all at the same time. I feel like we're in that, and I feel like we have a really good expert here with Sarah to talk us through it. So, without further ado, Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I'm super passionate about this topic and I can get long-winded about it and speak quickly about it. So if ever I lose you in any of this, I'd really love for you to raise your hand and ask a question and interrupt me. I don't see it as interrupting. We're collaborating together to make sure we all understand this. So we'll just dig right in. Maybe some of you feel like Josephine here, where she's a creative working in the UX field and is feeling bombarded with all of this talk about UX in AI and isn't quite sure how to impact AI tech through her contributions. She's worried that if she doesn't get on board to better understanding AI technologies, she will miss job opportunities. Can any of you relate? Please know that you are not alone. Why am I positioned to talk to you about this? Well, I've been working at the intersection of algorithms and user experience for over 20 years. I started my career working on algorithms and bedside monitors, moved over to working on algorithms that sustained lives, and then spent 5.5 years building a user experience research team that shipped Face ID, shipped Vision Pro, and a host of health sensing algorithms on the watch. For the last 3 years, I've continued this effort as a consultant, and it's dawned on me that as I have hired user experience professionals to support my clients, that there's this opportunity for us to evolve design thinking practices for AI, and that's why I'm here. So we've heard all the hype. AI is here to help us be more efficient, to optimize our decision making, to offset risk, and increase accuracy. And in some cases, it does that. And in a host of other cases, there is room for improvement. The whole point of AI is to deliver new levels of delight to users. And we're not quite there yet. So I want to take a minute, and for those of you that are able to come on camera or do something, I'd love just an indicator from you of, would it be useful to spend a few minutes talking about what is AI and how does it work? And it's okay if the answer is no. I'll move on to a different set of slides. What do you think, Cindy?
What were you thinking, Craig? I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I would say just because it's so commonly misused, I think it's always good to square up on terms. So I'd be interested to hear what how you define AI.
Right, let's go there. Okay, so traditional algorithm, where I started my career. I worked alongside engineers where we created the rules and the parameters of how we wanted the machine to function. In this case, is this a normal ECG wave pattern? And we gave it tons and tons and tons of ECG data, what felt like tons to us at the time. And we created a feature. It's very simple logic. 1 + 1 = 2. In this case, it's the typical wave of an ECG waveform. We can defend the logic. But as we've moved into the world of machine learning, the way that our machine learning algorithm works is you give it the data, you tell it the features that you're looking for, The machine learning algorithm makes sense of that. And in a very narrow application, like in this case, Face ID, it makes a decision. Is this the person that is authenticated with the phone? Yes or no? Okay. But as we move into deep learning algorithms, they are compiled of multiple layers of neural networks. Well, what's a neural network? It's taking vast amounts of data. We're talking about millions of data points. And it's the engineers that are building this are making connections from one data point to the next, from this data point to a host of other data points. And in there, the algorithm is extracting what's meaningful. An engineer can't always explain how the algorithm is making those decisions, but what we can see is that the algorithm can then predict what we think is the fastest way to get from point A to point B, or to layer on those predictions, drive autonomously. Okay, so the thing to keep in mind is that the neural network, it's tons of data. The engineers have applied the logic of how the data points relate to one another. There's layers and layers of algorithms here. But now we're in the brave new world of generative AI, where we're talking data on the magnitude of billions of what we call a node, which is lots and lots of data points. And here, the logic between the nodes is fuzzy. Okay, the engineers don't necessarily have the oversight to predict what the outcome will be or even repeat it. But the beauty of it is that we can create new content. Okay, so another view about this is that artificial intelligence is one big view of making machines think like humans. The machine learning piece of it is where we're teaching the algorithm, we're teaching the machine how to learn, how to make sense of the data. And the various patterns of that is the model that gets chosen. So the model is a reinforcement learning model, or a supervised learning model, or a deep learning model, which is layers and layers of these different kinds of models. And in the new world that we're in, generative AI. Generative AI is a very small part of this overall landscape of all the different kinds of models that we can use. You with me so far? Okay, so where does this happen in real life? So another way to think about this, supervised learning, if you will, is the data gets labeled. And this is narrow AI, okay? It's a very particular application. And once all that data is very specifically labeled, the algorithm can predict and classify. For the example, weather, right? You'll see this in like forecasting purchasing for a particular user, okay? Another application unsupervised is that the data is not labeled. And so the algorithm gets to uncover these connections and learn from it. The logic is fuzzy to the engineers building it. And another application of machine learning, another model type, is a reinforcement model. And this is like the case of all the cars that you might see around the streets of Austin that have got all these sensors on them. In real time, they are taking in this data and learning from it. That's why sometimes you might see an engineer sitting in the back with their laptop open. Listen to that data, ignore that data, learn from that data. In real time, the machine is making sense of that data and learning from it. Well, why does this matter to the UX community? Because of data, because we have a role in this data. So another thing to think about in all of this data is where it comes from, right? Simplified data in, machine makes sense of it, decisions, predictions, creation of new content out. But this data has a life cycle. And this is a very simplified version of it. The data is gathered, it is prepared, wrangled means make sense of it. How are we gonna make some of these connections? Analyze it. Do we want to keep it? Do we want to throw some of it out? Train the model. It's a lot of effort going into getting the data in a place where we can feed it to the algorithm. but to err is human. It's user experience principle number one. And humans are involved in every step of getting the data ready for the algorithm. And we are full of bias. We are full of judgment. We are full of making the decisions that lead to undesirable outcomes, right? From our childhood, from what we were educated on, from what we haven't been educated on, and from our own life experiences. And that bias shows up in the data. I'm getting ahead of myself. And it leads to unintended outcomes. You can take a screenshot of this if you want to follow up on any of these articles. But it's been coming into the forefront of the news for the past few years of how these AI technologies are not performing to their expectations of delighting the users, right? And there's an ugly underbelly of who is part of the system of sanitizing this data. And companies have good intentions to do this, and these people have good intentions to do the right thing. And there's consequences to it, possibly unintended consequences, right? Maybe we didn't think about with the foresight of like what the consequence to these people would be of cleaning up ChatGPT all day long. So why am I bringing this to your attention? Because big picture, all those steps in the data, it's one thing for ChatGPT to not produce the results that I want. It's another thing when entire communities are experiencing unintended consequences in the realm of policing, in the realm of healthcare, and the realm of education. So my argument here, my call to action, my intention is that the user experience community can dig in and understand the breadth of complexity here as it relates to managing the data and corralling the data, and start to think about these people as players that we are designing for, okay? As I mentioned, the results are not always accurate, and the consequence, big term, long term to society. Right now, we've got Google producing accurate data for us, right? With the exception of Gemini. But we have that little trigger in us that's like, man, this policing system is inappropriately detecting people, and it's not true. This healthcare system is biased towards certain ethnicities and not attentive to other ethnicities. So we've got a conscience right now of that's erroneous. But as we become more dependent on these technologies long term, maybe society won't detect these errors. And that's what we need to get ahead of. And there's economy around all this data. This is from an article from LinkedIn in 2022, if I recall. And these were all the companies that were popping up at the time that are just part of managing the data that feeds into the algorithms. And finally, just within the last few weeks, we have a top-down solution to try to drive safety and accuracy and maybe some ethics into our algorithms. But we all know that a top-down approach takes time. And I'd like to propose another way, a bottoms-up approach. I'm just going to pause for a minute. I moved quickly through those slides. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? No question is a silly question, just know that. Okay. Well, as user experience professionals, we know that it all starts with the users. I'd like to encourage you, as you prepare yourselves in your careers to work on AI and technologies, to start to think about the users differently. Yes, we know that we think about the users in terms of their culture and value education. But the thing that's unique that I want you to consider more deeply is who are those people that are on the fringe? And what are the edge cases? That's a term I want you to remember. What are the edge cases? Because the beauty of AI is that you are designing for personalization, where everyone gets a personalized experience. But if the data is like a bell curve and it's representing most of the people that seem common, right? The average person, which is likely what you'll find in a data set these days, then the algorithm is not fine-tuned for the people on the edges. And it's our job to advocate for them and find ways to design the AI so that they too can have a truly personalized experience. This comes through representation in the data, and we as UXers have a role to play in that. You with me on this so far? Okay. So we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to bring AI to the level that the scientists have claimed it to be, right? For it to truly be inclusive and mitigate the biases that are currently present in our systems, for it truly to be personalized and accessible. What does it mean to be individualized? It means that the person that's not the common user can experience the product with the same delight as you and I, and that we all experience accurate AI solutions, that our data is held securely, that our data is not shared with others, and that over time, we will experience this consistently such that we can trust the AI and we can trust the brand that is using AI to deliver solutions. Well, how do we go about doing that? I think you wrote about this, Cindy, on LinkedIn today or yesterday about what makes us different from an AI agent. And our superpowers are empathy and understanding, creativity and innovation, our intuition, which is a form of intelligence, and this awareness of ourselves and awareness of the environment, using all 5 of our senses, sentient beings, to make decisions. So let's use our superpowers to create not just user experiences, but to create human experiences for all of the people that are involved in developing these AI technologies. And it starts with design thinking. I've got the Nielsen-Norman design thinking model up here. For the purpose of today, I'm consolidating it into these 4 steps noted here. And for the rest of our time together, I will be speaking to these 4 pieces of content in Dorj. How to think about the human context. I will teach you a tool on collaborative brainstorming. We will look at how to analyze potential consequences of AI and get ahead of it and design mitigations into the product, and then how to monitor for unintended consequences long term. So let's dig in. Discover. First thing we do, what is the problem? What are we trying to solve? And no matter how fancy our AI tech gets, how much data we can gather from the internet, how much some of these generative AI tools can lead us down a potential solution path, I want us to still keep in mind how much data we can get by going to observe end users, right? We might be under more pressure to deliver sooner, but our superpower is to use all 5 of our senses with these end users. And another thing that I would like for us to start to think about in this first phase of the design thinking models is, what data do we have already? And how might this data be used to train the algorithms? Because in my experience, the engineers, management, product management, leadership, they're already running. They've got an idea in mind. Oh, we can use this data and we can put this solution in place and we can have a product in a year. Yes, you can. But whose world does that data reflect? The common in the bell curve, the edge cases. So I'd like for you to start thinking about this during the discover phase, because I don't want you to get behind where the company will be reacting at the end because we didn't have the right data. We'll move on to define. In my experience with generative AI tools and the speed at which AI technologies are coming to market, we are being pressured to short circuit our journey mapping. We are being pressured to short circuit these detailed task analyses. It's been my experience. And instead, there's a focus on what's the intent and what's the output. What's the user trying to do? Can the algorithm perform that way? And so I just encourage you to think about this intent in terms of a human-centric experience, to broaden our perspectives of it's not just the end user that could be impacted by this. It could be the other family members in the home, right? And we're good at this. We're good at this. We're good at thinking about who are all the people impacted. And I just want to encourage you to leverage that as your superpower, to teach the other people around you that you're working with how to think about this. And then establishing these clear goals and metrics for success. It may not be about task completion anymore. It may be about productivity. It may be about how we measure efficiency in new ways. And the thing that's different to start thinking about now, early in the define phase, is what human tasks can AI automate? And what new tasks could we do with AI? Okay. Well, how do we go about doing that? Well, I propose that we start with a collaborative brainstorm. You as the expert who's spent time interviewing users, who's spent time going through customer complaint logs, you have a sense of who the user needs and values, what the user needs are and what are their values. You need to know this coming into this brainstorm. The data scientists and the algorithm engineers that you're working with, they're going to bring to the table all of these ideas on AI capabilities, okay? Narrow AI algorithms, online learning, right? All these different ways that we're not experts in, but we get to learn real time. And when we have that user need and we have an AI capability, collectively can come up with a feature or a solution. Also bring product management in, right? Know who your key stakeholders are, have them at this collaborative solution. But in my experience, this was something that happened after workflows were defined, right? After we had this very detailed end-to-end experience. No, we're doing this early on, okay? Because it's not about the entire workflow anymore. It's still important for us to know when we're speaking with our peers, it's intent and output, right? Capturing it here in this brainstorm. The next piece in that then, once you've got this brainstorm, is that you go through and evaluate these ideas, these solutions against user value, technical feasibility, and the data needs to bring that algorithm to life. What do I mean by user value? Well, if you haven't heard it yet, I encourage you to take a screenshot of this, to go to ainowinstitute.org, to dig up the KPMG report on the perspectives on fate. So fate is a term that came out of academia in around 2010. And I think that the AI Now Institute socialized it in around 2015, 2016. But it is a way to represent these user values when thinking about AI technologies. So could this algorithm evenly represent all users and treat them all the same? Would we be willing to be accountable and responsible for the outcomes? Can we build this algorithm in a way that it's readily understandable? Transparency is a tough topic in the AI world because of that whole concept of these inferences that these algorithms are making. But the whole point of governance now is to say you have a responsibility for the behavior, the performance, and for us to understand loosely how the algorithm works. So could we do that? And lastly, is what we're doing here right, just, equitable, and good. And now any team that's collaborating together, any company, you get to figure out your own threshold for these together. What does it mean to do the right thing for the user, for your company in your context, right? What does it mean to be just for our users and equitable across all users? These are fuzzy things that we get to wrestle with. There's not a right or wrong answer. But with experience, with thinking about it, with pushing products to market and seeing what works and what doesn't work, like a rising tide raises all ships, we can all build our sensitivity together for these things as a user experience community. We can knowledge share on how we thought about fairness and how it worked, right? So we're learning together on what it means to apply fate as a judgment on user values when we're building these technologies. And that's why post-release monitoring is so important. So we can see how these things actually behave in the real world and reevaluate our sensitivity to these things. Are you with me? Okay. So we talked about we're evaluating user values, we're evaluating technical feasibility, and we're evaluating the data need. And we're going to come back and revisit this model of what the data goes through, right? So at this point in time, if you're coming up with a few solutions that are looking pretty good, they could add some really meaningful value to the user experience. Well, now it's time to come up with a data strategy and build out a pipeline or work with companies that will deliver that pipeline to push the data through these steps. But we as the user experience people, we get to have a seat at the table. I encourage you to find a way to the seat of the table where you're talking about these data needs. Again, whose world does that data reflect? And we know through the literature, we know through academia, we know through our own experiences of AI technologies in our hands that the data gets to be clean to produce better outcomes. It needs to be diverse and representative of the users, and it needs to be accurate to the context, okay? And purposeful. You'll get better results. Building Face ID, get better results when you have faces and real life content of what happens in our everyday lives to train the algorithm. So you get to think about all the variety of ways, if you're going to go generate more data, if you're going to go collect more data, of how to get cleaner, purposeful data. And another thing that I think that UX can advocate for is the employee experience. Who are the people that are working at these steps? What biases do they have? What is the consequence of them dealing with this data day in and day out? What bias could that generate in the data alone? I think we have a responsibility to think about this. And if we can come up with that moment where, again, our intuition or our emotion, very meaningful forms of intelligence say to us, ooh, I'm not sure about that. Listen and find a way to act on it. And the other piece of this is that generating the data, housing the data, sanitizing the data, it comes with a huge cost. And that can impact the customer experience and the overall cost of the product. So I think it's important that we need a lot of data to do this well. We need the right data to deliver accurate solutions. There's effort involved, and it's a trade-off, okay? ChatGPT, billions of dollars into what it takes to deliver ChatGPT, right? Not every startup has that kind of money. In 2023, I think the cost was around $4 million to build a machine learning or neural network algorithm that could go to market. $4 million of data alone. So we get to be kind of scrappy with this. And it takes creativity from all of us on how to get there. So as I said, to weigh in on technical feasibility of these things, and then evaluate the data needs to build it well. Yes, Bob.
When you have those data, so to speak, I guess, arguments where you're advocating for a more diverse, I guess, data set, who is the audience? Is it primarily engineers? Is it the business marketing that's trying to say, no, we have enough with the middle of the bell curve, so to speak?
That's a great question.
Or, or who, I'm curious.
Yeah. It's upper management that is responsible for maintaining the cost. I mean, I've been building AI technologies for 9 years, and on very, very, very rare occasions has an algorithm engineer ever said to me that they've got enough data. Okay. But it's costly and it takes a lot of time. And so the pressure comes from upper management in controlling the overall product development cost. Does that answer your question? He's on mute.
Yes, sorry, couldn't try to unmute. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions about this before we move on? Okay. So in the define phase, you've created this brainstorming map of a bunch of AI opportunities that map to user value and user needs. And then we get to move on to prototyping and building it and iterating on that prototype. It's very common in this phase that you'll build a very small scale model of what it is you're thinking of this feature or function, and you'll test its core functionality. And I very strongly recommend that as the UXers, you're part of that testing. Remember those edge users and edge cases? Those need to be represented in the test cases, so we have visibility into how it's performing early. For those of you who have worked in regulated industries, whether it be healthcare or finance or transportation, there's a tool called a use error analysis, or yeah, I've heard a different term lately, but I can't think of it right now. In my days of doing all this, it was a use error analysis. Well, in the work that I've done with clients in the past few years, we've iterated on this idea of a use error analysis and brainstormed a consequence analysis. Another way to think about it is a potential outcomes analysis. The importance of this, because we're designing for the human experience, not just this moment right now user experience. We're designing for the human experience. The importance of this consequence analysis is to think about short, mid, and long-term effects of an idea on society. Like, did Mark Zuckerberg know that if we would spend tons and tons of time in front of Facebook, of an algorithm that pushed us content that we liked, that we would be creating this inherent bias of thinking that our view is right? That's likely an unintended long-term consequence, right? These are the kinds of things that we get to think about when building AI technologies. And I'd like us to feel a sense of responsibility, not from a place of heaviness, but from a place of opportunity. We get to do this. We as UXers get to advocate for the end users, for the human experience in a long-term perspective. And through this consequence of analysis of doing it alongside the engineers, because we'll need their help on coming up with these things, you can build your awareness of AI weaknesses and get really radical in your ideas to continue to uncover the unknowns of AI and the unknowns of your algorithm. And then we get back to the drawing board and we put our designs in place to mitigate those risks. So how does this work? When doing a consequence analysis, then you're going to take these features and solutions that you came up with, and you're going to brainstorm like crazy consequences, short, mid, long term. The algorithm is erroneous. The algorithm hallucinates, which is happening, right? It's one of the slides I showed you of Google CEO apologizing for false information out there. Malicious intent. When building Face ID, I did not think about all the ways that people would try to break into someone else's phone. It blew my mind that that would happen, but it does, and we have to design against it. And dependency. What happens to human decision-making when someone uses this technology over time? Could they lose their sensitivity to the granular things that happen when you're analyzing data today? Like you as a researcher, when you're in the weeds of the data and you notice a little pulse and your gut says, oh, I got to dig into that. Could we lose a sensitivity to that if we're relying on AI to do that for us? Maybe that's not a problem, but maybe it is. And that's the point of this exercise. So brainstorm the consequences, brainstorm what the detriment is to the user experience with that consequence. What's the likelihood of occurrence? What mitigation do we want to put in place? And once that mitigation is in place, now what's the overall risk to the user? This is a common risk management tool. You can look it up, use error analysis, bottoms up risk management tool. That's what this is, but it's through the lens of AI. And I've worked with clients on this, and we've built it out rows and rows and rows of ideas, consequences, and it has shaped what uniquely we do differently with the algorithm that we were building. And what things we decided were too high risk to ship right now. Put it on the product roadmap, but we had to go do some research and some prototyping to figure out how we could drive down the risk to an acceptable level before we shipped. Any questions with this before I move on? Okay. So the point then is that the final design, as in the iteration that you ship, is that you have a refined interaction model for the entire human experience. You've considered the short, medium, and long-term consequences of the technology. And as you update that design, in AI, the thing that I'm still wrapping my head around is that failures will happen. And have we done our due diligence to ensure that the benefits of the technology outweigh the risk? Amanda Askell at Anthropic, which I think is a beautiful company, by the way, spend time digging into it, produced this 3H framing of to ship the product, it has to meet a bare minimum performance of being helpful, honest, and harmless. So in the world that I come from, we would never have shipped an ECG algorithm that didn't accurately detect heart rate. We would have never shipped Face ID if it didn't have a superior level of quality. But as we move into these neural networks and we move into these generative AI tools or solutions, there's a fuzziness around performance and what is good enough to ship. And while I personally want to keep a bar here of this excellent, delightful, knock it out of the park user experience, AI tech in the neural network, generative AI space is here. And so we collectively get to build our barometer of what's the minimum performance that we need to be helpful, honest, and harmless. And we get to do it collectively on our product development teams. And then, like crazy, test that product when you think you've got that final design. In the world I come from, medical devices and human factors, we call it summative testing. We're not just doing the common scenarios, we're doing the edge cases. And it's important to observe closely for potential bias and unintended consequences then. It's not just, did they fail at the task or pass the task? It's what was their decision making as a function of this information that we're displaying to them, and what new actions did they take? Again, intent and output. I think it's important to then examine the user behavior and their like subsequent activities as they're working with AI, because you will find things different than what you intended. And because we're looking for the bar here, this minimum level of acceptance, not here, in my experience, the business approaches to release, go get more data, and improve over time. So in this last step of testing and iterating and releasing, a function of this is, where's that threshold for our minimum level acceptance? And where do we already know we need to go get more data for the next iteration of the product? Now, something I wouldn't do this justice if I didn't talk about it in this talk is that governance is coming, right? In 2026, I believe, the United States has said that they will reinforce these laws that the EU put in place to say, we're going to ensure that AI technologies are delivering transparent technology. And so companies that are building AI tech get to develop a culture around this, a culture around these data, privacy, and security values. And how do we monitor risk of people that have malicious intent? And how will we demonstrate compliance to the United States government that we are doing our due diligence to build safe technologies? So it starts now, and it starts with companies creating these committees of governance, risk, and compliance. And I think user experience needs to be at that table, right? As we think about the different people that are part of the system, that are corralling the data, if the company that you're working with is building an AI technology where any of those data steps are under your roof, you have a responsibility to design solutions for them and advocate for them, what that experience will be like when they're spending hours upon hours sanitizing the data. And this is a really hot topic in the AI community. I encourage you to go spend time at the ethicalaidatabase.org site. These are all companies that have come forward to say, I too want to make AI better, and the different sectors that they're playing in to do so. One, build up your own awareness of this, and two, they need UX people. So we talked about designing for the human experience through this collaborative brainstorm, through consequence analysis, and how do you monitor long-term for these unintended consequences through listening on what's happening in the real world of how they're actually using the product. And in the end, if we do this well, we'll have a refined interaction model for the entire human experience, where the interaction model is that big data wheel again of everyone that plays a role in contributing to the AI tech and the community that is impacted by the AI tech. And the AI industry is just exploding right now. And I put this here to remind you all that for us to be meaningful UXers, we get to learn these tools like consequence analysis so we can bring new value to these companies. Our jobs might be shifting. In my world, it is shifting. Yes, I need to bring all my user experience superpowers, the things that got me excited about UX in the first place, like applying empathy every day. I'm a very emotional person. But we also get to evolve our skills and fine tune what we're bringing to the table to help these companies ship products equivalent to what they intended. So I would be remiss if I left this time together if I didn't talk about how to use generative AI for our work. And it's there. I have a slide on it. There's lots of tools out there. They do help us move more efficiently. They can help spark creativity. They're awesome. Use them. And then get back to designing for AI. So as I've mentioned, we're designing for AI in the data, in how the data is generated and sanitized. We're designing for AI about the data, the ethical data handling and solutions, the governance, right? We're designing for AI about the process. Let's evolve the design thinking process. Come up with new tools beyond what I've proposed to you today. Publish it. Help the whole user experience community come up and meet the moment of what the AI technology needs. And lastly, we're all here to design for the humans. That we're here to develop more transparent and interpretable AI systems. And we've got a long way to go. And we need you. So in design thinking for the human experience, I think that our titles and our roles will shift. If you'll go out there and look today, there are a lot of research engineers. You know what they're doing? They're working here in the data and about the data. But we need UXers there, thinking about the users in a broader experience. And we do have superpowers, right? We are highly attuned at using our 5 senses in novel ways that, trust me, our fellow engineers are not attuned to. And our breadth of users need us at the table, bringing our superpowers to the discussions of how to design these technologies. And every day, day in and day out, we need you at the table with these people advocating for delight, so that we can bring the bar from here of minimum shippable experience to something that truly does advance the user experience. And as I mentioned, we get to develop new methods to drive ethical AI innovation into the human experience. So we talked about Josephine at the beginning, feeling like the train was about to pass her. But with these tools and thinking about how we can provide our skills to the industry in a different way, we can be on the train. We can be on the AI train. Questions?
So this is awesome. I actually have a question, and I don't, it might be tangential because I'm on LinkedIn all the time, right? As I'm sure that you are too. Um, and there's some UX people that are complete naysayers who are saying don't use these technologies because of the privacy and security. It's just not there. What I mean, what would be do you feel like this model that you've presented would address that, or is there some other way to address those concerns that folks are bringing up?
Well, the concerns are real. And we do have to think about what data, like when we're using generative AI for our work, we do need to think about what data you're sharing with the generative AI tool and what tool you're using and what has been in the press about how they're using your data and whether or not you want to opt into that. But I encourage you, if it's not something where it's safe and a good idea to share private company information on some of these generative AI tools, I encourage you to explore how to use it for your own uses, right? How to go create images for fun, how to write a poem to your mom for Mother's Day using ChatGPT. Because the thing that drives me crazy about generative AI tools right now is that prompt engineering is a thing because the user experience of these things bites. And I have to think like the machine to get the results I want. That's poor UX. But we need user experience people we need you all to build your own attitude, like your own perception around this, for your own opinion. So it's not just my opinion that it's an awful user experience. You have real-time experience trying to use it so you can speak to it, right? The AI train is much like the internet train, is much like the car industry back in the day. Engines exploded, right? Consequences, unintended consequences happened. It just took time for the technology evolve to get it safe. Much like the artists that continued to paint that didn't pick up the camera when it came along, they went out of business. So it's in our best interests to use these tools to keep ourselves proficient and efficient at doing our job. We just have to figure out how to do it safely where we're not revealing secret company information when we do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
What else?
Like there's a question in the chat. So can you give examples of edge users?
Edge users. I'm going to take ChatGPT since we're picking on it. Let's say someone doesn't know how to spell accurately. How can ChatGPT help them along to understand their intent and get a educated output, right? How can my grandmother, who does not know how to think like a machine, we're all lucky to be here. We know enough to know how to like try again and try again and try again until we get the result we're working with ChatGPT. How could someone like my grandmother use ChatGPT to write me a card because she doesn't have the dexterity with her hands anymore, right? So these are people where they might have accessibility concerns. They might not be the top educated person. If we think about healthcare, we have medical deserts in urban areas, and we have medical deserts in rural areas. Their healthcare needs are not represented in how they access healthcare. Okay. So if I'm building an algorithm that is this fancy thing that's going to help them detect an ailment with their body, but they don't have internet, how will we serve them? Right? So it's these things are like tangential to the product. It may not be one for one within the product itself, but it impacts the user experience. And in my case, in my experience, it's our job to advocate for them. What else?
I know we have time for at least one more question.
Go ahead, Craig.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I didn't get that double talk going. So I loved seeing your experience because to me it's been quite a while since I've taken a survey course in machine learning. And it's kind of funny that so many years later, now it's finally getting some momentum. And it seems like it's too early, to be honest, in my opinion, except for the use cases that you've been involved with. And I think that's the real strength of machine learning is lots of data applied to technical issues. What's interesting about yours is that it was actually on, widely released consumer products.
Yeah.
So you're kind of in that sweet spot of, I dislike the use of the term AI because I think that's an overreach. It's generally just machine learning. But if you stick with the machine learning approach, the sweet spot is lots of data applied to problems that don't have a lot of human interaction. I liked your talk and I appreciate you including those slides for some of the frameworks because eventually I think it will get better and better. It needs to be led by humans if it's going to serve humans. But my question really is about more those specific use cases and a specific ML models, where do you see them being most relevant right now? Because I think, to be honest, I think it was a great call out that you did, that saying in the data pipeline, there could be UX brought to that. That alone would be valuable and speed up the entire train. But to me, I think it's still so heavily technical, and so back-end engineer, if you let me use that, that the use case is really on these maybe machine-human interface points rather than the typical use of product. So do you see more strength coming, say, around med tech products? You showed one of your charts showed kind of the different industry uses. How would you how would you rank that? I guess is a much more concise way of asking my question, is how would you rank the application by industry as a place to focus? Did that make any sense at all?
Yes. So if
Okay.
the goal of AI is to offset human decision making and to make our lives easier, AI is in every industry right now. The problem is, or the challenge at hand, is whether or not that AI algorithm is truly doing what we intended to do, because it's fraught with error. Because the company doesn't have the money to house all of those data steps in-house. They're outsourcing to other companies where there are hundreds of hands touching the data and not getting it to a clean place before it comes in-house to train the algorithm. So it's everywhere right now. And I know this because I have clients from every industry, and I don't consider myself an expert in most of these industries. But yes, you're right in that the value of it is when we're making something more, like it's in manufacturing, right? It's in consumer electronics. You've been using it on Google Maps since you started using Google Maps. We just didn't talk about it like that, right? It didn't get airtime. Siri, if you use Alexa, right? These are all machine learning algorithms. So it's in our everyday lives. But the level, it's here, right? Alexa makes a mistake and we laugh about it, right? For regulated industries like medical, transportation, healthcare, these industries will be the last to fully adopt AI because their level of accuracy is a totally different ballgame than Alexa or ChatGPT, right? The risk comes into gray spaces like education, where it's not regulated. What is the bar for access for it to be harmless, right? And companies popping up and pushing, because we live in this democracy where we got this whole thing of like capital gains going on, right? And they're going to push for these AI technologies in a space like education. They're going to have huge long-term detrimental impacts on us if we're not concerned with the ethics of the biases in those algorithms. So it's in every industry right now. It's just a matter of healthcare hasn't gotten it right. You know, Tesla and automated driving hasn't gotten it right. And those were some of the headlines that I showed today. But it is like an arms race, if you will, of everyone pushing to have this as their competitive advantage.
Yeah,
Final
that's
call. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Craig.
no, I just wanted to say that that's helpful. I think probably just 2 or 3 categories is useful. It's kind of a little bit of a bummer that the more interesting use cases are the ones that are going to be last. But I totally appreciate your point, is that God knows we need more UX people involved in this to make it so less sloppy. So I thank you for your presentation.
Thanks.
Last call for questions, because I know we're a little past 7:30 and I promised you a 7:30 stop time. Sarah, this was an amazing talk.
Thanks.
We've had really great speakers, but this, I was like totally zeroed in. Awesome talk tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Can we all give her a round of applause? Thank you so much. I will post this video and share it widely because I think your ideas need to go out to the wider UX community. So thank you very much. And thank you all for coming to UX and ATX tonight when you could be doing a lot of other things. I appreciate you, and hopefully I'll see you at the next social. So y'all have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Sandy.